I always get a kick out of it when Julie talks about going to see a band of my generation, Stevie Nicks. Next time the Rolling Stones are in town, I think you and I should go together.
I like the Rolling Stones.
Yeah, I think it's great. Has nothing to do with the sermon, just a side note. Please pray with me. God of grace and God of hope and God of blessing, the great gift giver, speak into our hearts. And as we explore this wild story, this way in which Jesus brings healing to the most unlikely of people, we pray that we would be open to the ways in which you bring healing to us. Amen. So this is a pretty wild story, right? It's the stuff of dreams. You ever have pizza at 3 in the morning, and then you go to sleep, and then when you have these wild dreams. So this is almost like a dream sequence, a story in which Jesus is going across the Sea of Galilee. And on the other side of the sea are a grouping of cities where non-Jews live. It's where the occupying forces, the Roman Empire, have set up their own city-states. And so it's kind of surprising that Jesus would go to a people of another faith to go and teach and to heal. But that's the setting that Jesus chooses. He goes to the outsiders. And there he finds a man who is demon-possessed. Now, to understand this imagery of being demon-possessed, it was believed at the time in the ancient world that anyone who had a physical illness or a mental illness was considered to be demon-possessed. And someone whose illness was particularly acute was considered to be possessed by many demons. To fully understand the power of this story is to understand that in the context of the time, the average person would believe that there were thousands of demons. And so it was a scary way to live, don't you think? The idea that at any moment a demon might enter into your life or into the life of a loved one and control their life and control their future. Into this fearful setting, Jesus goes to teach and to heal. And he finds this man who is possessed by many. We pick up the story in verse 4. This man, he lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. For he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and among the mountainside he would walk, and he would bruise himself, cut himself with stones. And Jesus saw the man. He saw this outsider. He saw this one that everyone else was afraid of and who had pushed to the very margins of society. And he said, "What is your name?" And this demon-possessed man said, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Now, in the Roman Empire of the time, a legion consisted of 6,000 men. So this man is saying, I have 6,000 demons possessing me. While most of us today don't believe in demon possession, this story still speaks to us. We look at our human condition and we see many forms of being possessed. Some of us are possessed by old wounds, old hurts that constrain us, as if we are literally shackled to our pain. Some of us are possessed by addictions to drugs or alcohol or money or sex or possessions or to power that constrains and defines who we are and how we see ourselves and how we live in the world. Some of us are possessed by a bitter spirit, unable to forgive those who have wronged us, and so we live steeped in our pain. Some of us are possessed by the demon of demonizing others, whoever the other may be. Perhaps we look at someone of a different religion or a different political perspective, a different culture or race, or in this most recent political campaign, there's a lot of mudslinging that has gone on where we label the other, where we set aside the other from ourselves. "What is your name?" asked Jesus. And man said, "My name is Legion, for we are many." This concept of being possessed, of being controlled by a force greater than ourselves, is part of what it means to be human. In verse 10, we see that Legion recognizes that Jesus has the power to heal. He recognizes the power of Jesus, the goodness of Jesus in his midst. Yet there's a part of us, I think, that wants to hold on to old wounds, old resentments, old ways of being, not because it's working for us, but because it is familiar. There are 2 sisters in my extended family, both now well into their 80s. 2 sisters who live 6 miles apart and haven't spoken to one another for 30 years. When my extended family gathers for a Christmas Eve or an Easter celebration at one of my cousins' homes, the 2 sisters need to check to make sure that the other sister won't be there. We become possessed, don't we, with old hurts or old pain and old resentments. "What is your name?" says Jesus. "Our name is Legion, for we are many." Jesus is calling the man possessed to change, to let go of that which no longer works for him, to let go of that which possesses and shackles and constrains and limits his ability to be free, to be alive. "What is your name?" The demons within this man recognize the power of Jesus, and they beg Jesus not to send them, the demons, out of the country. Now there in verse 10, on the hillside, a great herd of pigs was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the pigs, let us enter them." In verse 13, so Jesus gave permission, and the unclean spirits came out of the demon-possessed man, entered the pigs, and they went out into the sea. What a story, huh? What a story. Then verse 14. Then people came to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demoniac sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who was Legion that they were afraid of, and they begged Jesus to leave their neighborhood. It's curious, isn't it? Why would they ask Jesus to leave? Why didn't they celebrate that their neighbor was healed? Could it be that the demons, whatever their names, were so enticing, so seductive, that the people didn't want to let go of them in their midst? I can only wonder. It's such an interesting story with this vivid imagery. Why was it the people didn't thank Jesus? Why was it that they didn't welcome this man who is now healed in their midst? What was it they wanted to hold on to? Perhaps that which was familiar. In this morning's story, the demon-possessed man is restored to health, and he wants to thank Jesus, and he wants to go with Jesus, to stay with the one who has brought healing. And then Jesus says this to the now healthy man: "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And he went away and began to proclaim how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. And everyone was amazed. The healing and the hope that had been brought. We live in a nation and a world full of division and full of fear. A world of haves and have-nots. In the aftermath of a divisive election, many are afraid of what will happen to them. 11 million of our undocumented neighbors wonder whether they will be deported or incarcerated. A friend of mine named Jorge is an undocumented immigrant from Honduras. Honduras is considered, next to Syria, the most violent place on the planet. Honduras, because of gang wars. Jorge has lost his sister to gang war, and 10 years ago he fled to Honduras. He fled from Honduras to the United States. He's now married a friend of mine who's a pastor. Her name is Kim. But Jorge is undocumented. Jorge and Kim worry whether he will be forced to leave their family, to return to Honduras, and to be at risk again. We think of our Muslim neighbors, fearful that they will be forced to register simply because of their religion, and worrying about where that might lead. We think of women who fear the sexism, which is always a reality, will become even more blatant. In the last 6 weeks, the hate crimes reported in Massachusetts has gone up by 10% from a year ago, and that is a nationwide trend. There is much which divides us. There is much real fear in our nation in this post-election season. So what does this story of healing and hope that was lived out 2,000 years ago have to say to us today? We are reminded to rest in this story governed by love, that this child of God named Jesus came into our midst to heal and restore us. This child of God who sits with us in the hospital rooms and in our darkest moments. This Jesus who comes to remind us that we are never alone and never forgotten. It was this Jesus who went to an outsider, someone of a different race, someone of a different religion, that his own people had cast aside. He went and blessed him and restored him to health. When I served a church on the West Coast, there was a man named Lyle. And Lyle was psychotic. He had a mental illness that separated him from his family. He refused to take his medication. And he would walk up and down the streets, Main Street, just like Cabot, and he would shout out in incoherent statements, and he would shout out profanity. And sometimes he would get in people's faces, literally, and he would frighten them. And occasionally, Lyle would be taken from the streets, and he would be put back on his medication, and then he would be released from the streets, and his behavior would start again, and people were afraid of him. Oftentimes, he would sit on the steps of the church that I served, and he would shout out, and people would give him a wide berth. But one day, I was coming up to the church, and sitting on the steps was Lyle. And his face had changed. The angry look, the clenched jaw was gone. His features had relaxed, and his eyes were clear. And I sat down next to Lyle, who I had known for several years, and I said, "Lyle, it seems like you're having a good day." And he said to me, "Pastor, it's a beautiful day." I said, "Lyle, you just seem to be so happy." And he looked at me and he smiled and he said this phrase, which I'll never forget: "I've come home to myself." I'd like to tell you that all the future days for Lyle were happy. But about a week later, I saw Lyle back on the streets with the same behavior. His mental illness had again taken control of him. But I know within that Lyle who is filled with so much pain, there is the Lyle who can say it's a beautiful day. And there are Lyles right here on Cabot Street, Lyles right here literally on our doorstep, right? And in our neighborhoods, in our own families, who are longing to be blessed, longing to be listened to, longing to not have people walk away from, but to befriend. Jesus is the one who comes and offers healing and hope and blessing. Jesus is the one who cast out Legion. and showed that man and shows us how to live and how to love, how to let go of that which possesses us. Where are you in need of healing? Where are you in need of hope? Who are the ones that you and I can bring comfort to and bless in this fearful time? Who are those who are afraid and marginalized that we can stand up with and stand for and be their advocate? This is a story that is 2,000 years old, but it is our story. It is a story of the freedom that comes when love is put into action. This is the good news. Thanks be to God, and may God's people say,